Okay, buckle up for safety, kids, because Mummy's taking us for an adventure. I have decided I'm going to Laurier for social work, and I'm going to tell you why, and why I think other folks should think about going to Laurier for social work as well. I have finally settled on this decision. It feels good. I also want to share, though, as someone who went to the open house, talked to faculty, talked to students, have really done my research. I think I've got a pretty good sense of the program and why it's a really strong program. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things higher education, business, photography, mental health, life. Okay, let's get into why Laurier for a Bachelor of Social Work is a good choice. Please note, important to know, this is Laurier Brantford. At the time of recording in 2024, Laurier does offer a Bachelor of Social Work, but it is only offered at the Brantford campus, not their main Waterloo campus, not their Kitchener or Milton campus. And no, the Bachelor of Social Work is not online, but more on that in a little bit. First reason why I love the Laurier program for social work is its direct entry, meaning you apply to Laurier for social work. If you get in, and you automatically, right away, you start studying social work. There are a bunch of programs in Ontario that are not direct entry. I think they're called professional entry, where you apply to the university, you're like undeclared or you're general in first year, you have to get good marks, and then you have to apply to get into second year. I believe Trent does this, McMaster does this. Here's the thing though, that sounds like a bait and switch to me, because like, what if you get into that university and then you apply to go to social work in second year and you don't get in? Like, what are you supposed to do then? You have to, do a general social science degree? No, thank you. At Laurier, you get in, you start studying social work in your first year, and you go through for your 4 years. Next, the reason why I love Laurier for social work is you can do a minor or an option. I had to really, wrap my head around this, but in Laurier, you don't just have minors, you have options, which are, enhanced minors, where you take additional courses. Minors have, for example, they'll say you have to take 6 courses in this field, and an option you have to take, for example, say 8. I think if you choose your option wisely, it can make you a better social worker, and it can strengthen your application at the end if you're going onto an MSW, and also expand what you know, what you're competent in, and things that just will make you a better social worker. So for example, I'm really interested in social work in healthcare settings, so I can actually do a health studies minor. Actually, I found out that the way I'm planning my courses, it looks like an option, which I think is a good thing. I can then strengthen my application when I'm going on to my MSW, my Master's of Social Work, when I say I want to work in a healthcare setting, and look, I've done this minor in healthcare studies. 3, reason why I love Laurier is there's a lot of flexibility. In my first year, and I'm gonna say, especially for Laurier, especially for Brantford Social Work, I have a lot of flexibility, mainly in my first year for online. I'm choosing to take most of my courses online so that I can save money on commuting fees. In social work, that kind of diminishes in second year, and that goes absolutely out the window in third year, because you've got to do practicum and you've got to do really practical training courses like social work with individuals, with groups, with families. You've got to do that in person. But for first year, I have the flexibility to make stuff online. But this also applies to other things like how you pay your fees and how you pay tuition at Laurier. It took me a second to wrap my head around it, but Laurier has more of a pay for what you take model than most other schools. Most other schools, your universities, you pay a set tuition fee, and generally that allows you 5 classes. If you take 4 classes, you don't get a bit of a refund, but if you take 6 classes, you don't have to pay more for most schools. Anything above or below that, then it starts to change. But at Laurier, what you take and what you register for is tied to your tuition. So you typically register for courses first, then you kind of get an invoice for how much you got to pay, and away you go. So I kind of like that flexibility. I got transfer credits, so to me that sounded like a discount. I'm I don't have to pay, those tuition fees to take those courses. I'm going to say this, not a lot of people love this, and actually this is a detractor for some people, so we're going to use this to spill some real hot tea. Next, something I love about Laurier and Laurier Brantford you get exposed to a lot of different populations of people. So you will be exposed to, like, there's a huge, or a large, sorry, Indigenous population in and around Brantford. You'll experience a lot of people, or come into contact with people experiencing poverty and homelessness. Because Laurier, Brantford, the campus is just downtown, and it's interspersed throughout downtown Brantford, which I have a video on this, I'll link it. You're going to see a lot of things. Most people become pretty uncomfortable with that. Social work students tend to not be uncomfortable with that. I think, frankly, but definitely by the end of the program, you should be comfortable being in an area with so many different populations. So one, that I think that makes you just a more well-rounded person to experience those populations, but also this is reflected in like what you can learn in social work at Laurier, because you can be exposed to so many different populations. If you want to work with people experiencing homelessness, if you want to work with people experiencing food insecurity, if you want to work with Indigenous people, you have access to those populations. If you were studying, and there's some cities, where there are social work programs and you wouldn't be exposed to those populations because of where they are. Laurier Brantford, the social work program exposes you to a lot of different populations that I think would make you a more well-rounded social worker. Next, another reason why I love Laurier Brantford, and this kind of came after I applied and got in and got to see resources, but the number of practicum placements that you have access to is wild. So once I got accepted and I got access to like the Laurier system for students, I was able to see the placement profiles for 2022 and 2023. So like end of pandemic and post-pandemic. And after reading, like, I had to stop because there were so many, but there were so many, I was like, any kind of social work experience you could want, you could get. One, I was surprised there were hospitals. I want to do hospital social work. And typically, like, that's protected for your master's. Hospitals want master students or people who have their master's. Laurier has connections to hospitals so that you can do it in your undergrad. Not through the sheer volume of placements they have available. They also have placements all over the place. So Laurier's in Brantford for the BSW. I'm based out of Guelph, Ontario, and there were placements in Guelph. There were placements around Guelph. There were placements closer to me than Brantford. And they have a fabulous process where if there's somewhere where you would like to work and you'd like to do a practicum, you don't have to approach them. And actually, at the time of recording, what it said in the rules is that students should not be approaching potential placements, that you have to suggest the name to Laurier. They will facilitate the process and try and see if that place is willing to become a placement. And then they'll connect you with it. If it's successful, you get that placement. So again, students don't have to be the one like trying to coordinate the whole thing and get the placement. The school is going to advocate for them and work on our behalf if we want a new placement. One other thing with placement and practicum that you should know, and Laurier does this very differently than most other schools. At first I wasn't totally sold, now I kind of am. They do practicum very differently than other schools in that you do a practicum at the end of third year. So 2 semesters, you do your first practicum in the winter of your third year. You have summer off, unless you take courses or whatever. And then you go and do your second practicum placement in the first semester of fourth year. So it's not just in fourth year, and it's not one semester immediately into the next. There's a break in there. I think that's really clever to allow space for learning, for reflection, to figure it out. Also, though, a lot of 4-year BSWs, Bachelor of Social Work, you would do one practicum placement for the whole year. This forces you to break it up, which I think is actually really helpful. It makes for a better social worker. The next thing that I really love about the Laurier BSW is that it's a pretty well-rounded curriculum in all different areas of social work. I will say, I do think they have a slight leaning on or bias towards like a clinical focus. You take 3 courses in one semester alone in how to work with individuals, groups, and families and couples, as well as a whole course in like communication and interviewing skills. So there is a slight clinical focus. I think that's really important, though. I'm starting to think that there's not enough clinical training in social work when you look at especially BSWs and MSWs. But overall, they also force you to take they get you to take courses, a lot of courses in like Indigenous studies and pro-reconciliation and anti-racism and politics and policy making. So I think the curriculum is really well rounded. Really what that means is if you're not sure what kind of social worker you want to be, I think Laurier is going to be a good place for you. That's certainly an appeal for me because I think I want to do hospital social work. I think I want to do clinical work and therapy, but I'm not entirely sure and I keep changing my mind on things. And if there's any school that's going to set me up for success, it's Laurier. Other schools, they have other biases or preferences. So, for example, McMaster, their BSW is really focused on like a macro level. So policy work, systemic work, stuff like that. You have like York University, they focus heavily on like the theory and practice of social work and ideas of how social work can be a force for good. You have schools like TMU, formerly Ryerson University, that focus on like pro-reconciliation, anti-racism in practice, both with individuals and with large groups and systemically. They all have different focus areas. I think Laurier has the most broad approach. Final reason that I love Laurier and why I think everyone should give it, a fighting shot for the BSW is just the diversity of the faculty and their research interests and the areas where they work. All kinds of research and social work practice are represented. I was really impressed by this at the open house. One, how many faculty were there, and then they were all passionate about their research and what they were working on as social workers, as researchers, and totally inviting students in. So, like, one person was all about queer representation, especially in healthcare settings, in higher education, access to services, policy. Another person was studying like the impacts of AI on social work, which was really cool. Another person was working on intimate partner violence, but more specifically, like how that impacts kids. And she had that focus on children, but also women. Lots of researchers working in queer spaces or with LGBTQ2IA communities about like drug use, access to health services, access to mental health, how mental health is conceptualized. And especially there's lots of researchers working in like mental health in an anti-oppressive, anti-racist way. So lots of different faculty with lots of different experiences and research interests. That's what stood out to me. Let me know, do any of these areas interest you, or what sounds like it could be missing from your end? As always, make sure to like and subscribe for all things higher ed, business, photography, mental health, life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Bye for now.